The first chapter in Bill Robertie's How to Play the Opening in Backgammon focused on the opening move, while the second chapter focuses on the reply to the opening move. So, in other words, our opponent has played the first roll, won the dice roll, and played the first roll, and now we've got to respond to them. And replying to the opening move is a difficult, I'm going to show you why in a second, a difficult concept that has attracted quite a bit of attention. And it is something that I think with a bit of practice we can really improve on. So, why it's difficult is because, for the opening, we only have 15 rolls to learn. There's only 15 possible rolls at the outset, 15 possible dice combinations because you don't use doublets. With the second roll, we add in the doublets. So instead of having 15 rolls to play, we have 21. But of course, it's not just that the rolls, we don't play those rolls in isolation. We play them in response to what our opponent has done. So they're in response to the 15 rolls that our opponent has played. But it gets even worse than that because the 15 rolls our opponent has had, there's different ways they can play them. So, for instance, with a 6-4, you can run the whole way, 24 to 14, or you can play 6 up and 4 down, or you can make your 2 point. There's 3 different ways. So, the 15 rolls that our opponent has had will lead to. It's hard to establish exactly how many possibilities because we're going to discount if our opponent does something really stupid, like if you got a 3-1 and you played, I don't know, 24 to 21 and 21 to 23, you just wouldn't do that. So we don't bother with those. But the lowest number of possible options that our opponent has is 24, which would leave 504 situations for us to consider. But it gets worse, I'm afraid, because Mochi would say that it's slightly more than 24, that there's different ways the opening rows can reasonably be played, and we put that up at 30. And in fact, the kind of lead guy here, or one of the lead guys, Albert Steg, actually says, let's make it 31, because he adds in, if an opponent gets a 4-1, some opponents will play 13 down to 8, and if we can learn to respond to that, we can learn to respond to some of the more unorthodox roles. So potentially, there's 21 by 31, which is 651 possible situations we're facing. But wait, it gets worse because don't forget match score comes into play. So some match scores we might play more aggressively, some match scores we may play more cautiously. So my estimate is we're probably talking about 1,000 different situations that we may face. And that is a lot of positions to memorize, and you can't really do it. So several commentators have come in and said, well, look, can we find systems or rules that will help us deal with this second move? Because, imagine 1,000 possible situations. The potential to go completely arseways there is incredible. So instead, what the commentators have done is tried to find ways that can make it easier. And I love to think that you can, if we could get the second roll played without making a mistake, wouldn't that be a great start for every game in terms of our PR? So in terms of the commentators, well, I said Bill Robertie's chapter 2. We're going to look at that. His work is encyclopedic. It's his pages are very long and absolutely jam-packed with very small font, and he's about 30 pages just on the second roll. He takes every single possible roll and looks at every single, he starts off and say, well, say you roll a 6-2. How do you play a 6-2 in response to A, in response to B, in response to C? And he goes through all our opponent's rolls. It's very, very impressive. It's very, very thorough. It's a lot to take in. So he'll be buttressing some of the other people I'm going to look at for this section. I just think he's so thorough that it'd be easier to have a few principles to apply as well. There's another guy that I kind of like listening to some of his videos. I'm driving the car, I just put on his videos and just listen in. There's a couple of YouTube videos. James Vogel, he's also written a book, by the way, about backgammon. But he's a different approach entirely. He goes through, again, with the same sort of encyclopedic thoroughness. He says, well, look, what has our opponent rolled? So say our opponent has rolled a 2-1 and has played in a certain way. And then he says, look, according to our opponent's roll, how do we play a 6-6? How do we play a 6-5? How do we play a 6-4, 6-3, and so on? So he does the reverse of Bill Robertie. Bill Robertie takes our roll and then applies it to whatever the opponent has done. James Vogel takes the opponent's roll and applies our roll to different possibilities to what they've done. And I quite like that because it's an interesting theme. So he kind of says, well, if our opponent has made a point, how do we use all our rolls? If our opponent has split their back checkers, how do we use our opening rolls and so on? So it's an interesting way of doing it. And his videos, they're very lengthy as he goes through. He literally goes through all 630 different combinations over the course of 2 long videos. But I do find it interesting to kind of listen into. The third guy who we have met in the opening principles series of videos that I've been doing for Backgammon already. This guy called Albert Stegg. I don't know Albert Stegg, but anytime I hear him, he seems like a really nice guy, a really decent teacher. And he's done a lot of work. He went away, he said he just got fed up being beaten at backgammon by the good players. And he felt he always made mistakes at the start. So he did a huge amount of analysis on the opening and came up with his New England Backgammon Club is kind of his home base. And as part of that, he produced this really nice read. You can look it up you can Google it, Understanding Opening Replies, where he tried to come up with principles we could use to make things easier. And if you've followed every of these videos, we've dealt with some of those principles before, because I mentioned very early on in the course where he's talking about his 4 major ones in specific order. That blots want hitting, that's your first priority. Points want making is your second priority. If you can't hit a blot, try and make a point. 3, stragglers, your back checkers want splitting. And 4, stacks want unstacking. And that's a good way to start. And then he applies these principles in a way that actually ties in with everything everyone else, even though he's kind of, a lot of commentators will say, this is my ideas. They a lot in correlation. I'll come back to that later on. There's another writer called Axel Reichert. I don't know him at all, but when I was kind of looking and researching the second role, he's done a series, an article called "Rough and Ready Rules for Rookies." It's kind of nearly like a university level treatise about the second role. He's a lovely analogy where he says, the ugly duckling that became the beautiful swan. He tries to come up with a system that's feasible. For him, the rules that we're going to look at, he says, it's just too much to learn. So if we can't have the beautiful swan, the absolute perfection of a role, could we have what he calls, instead of the beautiful swan, the pretty duck, which basically says you can kind of get what he's kind of saying there. And he's a nice kind of entertaining way of writing, but basically what he says is, look, is there a system of rules we can use that are good enough that we get it right most times? And he kind of talks about whoppers and semi-whoppers. And he says a system of rules that will avoid the whoppers, avoid the semi-whoppers, and we'll make a few mistakes, but you know what? It's better than trying to memorize 1,000 positions. And even so, I have to say, having read his article, I kind of feel it all ties in, and all the different articles sort of correlate. So I'm going to put them all together shortly. I mentioned Albert Stegg. He produced an online resource called Backgammon Taskmaster, which I'm not very techie at all, and I couldn't get into it. Basically, where you put in, it was basically an online quiz. There's another commentator called Jeremy Bagay, I'm going to come to in a second. He produced a system, online system called Flashback. Same idea. They're like flashcards. I suppose Flashback, I'm just thinking of it now, it's probably flashcards for backgammon. But Flashback, again, I couldn't get into it, but the idea is that they give you a position and then they give you the answer. But there's another very simple website that I could get into, and I think it's really, really helpful. It's called bgquiz.com. I don't know who wrote this website. It's because I love it. And what I'm trying to do every night now, since I've got into this, is just to go in. You go into it, and there's a section, you click down the bottom in the menu on the bottom side on opening replies, and it basically takes 425 of the most kind of obscurest opening replies out of those 620. They're not the obvious ones. And it just gives you a quiz position. So it gives you a position, and you have to select. It gives you multi-choice, 5 choices. You pick what you would play in that position, and then it gives you the answer. And what's quite nice is there's a little tally at the top. As you keep going, it gives you a PR score for how many blunders you make or errors you make along the way. You won't make blunders with opening replies, but you can make errors that are necessary. And I really enjoy this. I'm trying to do this every night. I'm just doing 20 questions from bgquiz.com on opening replies and recording my PR for the 20 questions. And it's tough enough, but I'm kind of saying, if I can get my PR down to about 2, I think that's I've done well that evening. Sometimes you get tougher questions and it's higher. Sometimes you get easy questions. So 2 isn't outstanding. I'm not a genius grandmaster or anything like that. It's just sometimes there's some easier ones in there that'll help you artificially keep it low. But I recommend it is worth a look. bgquiz.com. Go down in on the left hand side, click opening replies, and then at the bottom it tests you or quiz or something. You press that button and then just throws up positions at you. And I think it's quite helpful. But the key person when it comes to the second roll is a guy called Jeremy Bagay. He's an American player. He wrote this article on Mastering the Second Roll. He went away and really studied it in detail as well. And that's him there winning some trophy in the backgammon. It was the best photograph of him I could find. And he's come up with a system that makes sense, that sort of encompasses all the other commentators I've talked about there, all sort of kind of fit in with his system. If you were going to if you want to kind of look up, I said you can look up his article back. He calls it Bagay's Replies, Mastering the Second Roll. I'd suggest before you even do that, Mochi. If you go onto YouTube and search for Mochi Second Roll, you'll find a seminar that he gave in Los Angeles, and he's talking about the second roll, and he actually says, "Look, don't thank me, thank Jeremy Bagay, because I'm just working off him." But the really good summary of the second roll of the system that we can use. So it looks something like that. That's, if you look up on YouTube, that's Alex Shagian. Always have these strange faces in his videos for some reason. But it's the Mochi seminar there. Mochi talking about Bagay's system, and I find it very helpful. So there are all the different things that people and sources for advice on how to play the second roll. And what I propose to do is to use Jeremy Bagay's system as the basis, but involve what each of the commentators are saying about the different positions. So sometimes in videos I've said, well, here's what Michi said. Now here's what Dirk Sheeman said. Now here's what Bill Robertie said. I'm going to do it differently. I'm going to go through each roll according to Jeremy Bagay's rules. I'm going to go each of his rules and then just involve what the other commentators are saying at the time. So Jeremy Bagay has 12 rules, and the first 3 are important, the order. So the first rule is on your second, if you're playing the second roll of the game, if you can hit a blot outside your inner board, you should do so. So anything outside your inner board, if there's a blot there and you can hit it, do. That's your first priority. Number 2, if you can't do number 1, do number 2. Play your naturals. The naturals are the ones like 3-1, 4-2, 6-1, 6-5. The ones that you'd automatically play straightforwardly. Play them if you can't hit. If you can't do 1 or 2, and your opponent has left a checker loose in the 5-point or 4-point, hit loose, and it's always going to be right. Which I love that idea of it's always going to be right is really helpful. I like clear-cut rules. Those are the big 3. Then after that, 4, 5, 6, and 7 to 12 aren't in priority because you can't do them. You either have what he means by ace X. If you roll a 1 and another number is number 4. The 5th rule is if you roll a 6 and another number. The 6th rule is other combination numbers, and then 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. He's got a rule for each double. So if you roll double 1, it's number 7. Roll double 2, it's number 8, and so on. And what I propose to do is go through each of these rules and just take what the other commentators have said and add a bit of depth to it. Because as well as the rules there, Jeremy Bagay has 26 sub-rules, which are just nothing to be too worried about. So here's an example here. I just picked it and put this in myself. Well, the first rule is hit in your outer board if you can at all. So we can hit with a 6 and 6-2 in 2 different ways. So we're, as usual, playing anti-clockwise, bearing into the bottom right. We've got a 6 and a 2. Well, we can hit with a 6 coming down from a 13 point. We can play 13 to 7 and hit like that. And I won't even worry what we do with the 2. But there's another way we can hit with the 6, where we can come out from the back up the top there and go play out for the 6 and then on with the 2 and hit our opponent. And one of the sub rules is that you should hit, if you can hit 2 checkers, hit the one that's most far advanced, because that one there is the correct play, because black has moved further on the board. We're sending them further back in the race So it's more effective to hit them there than close to their starting point. And that's that's an example I just thought of one of the sub rules. So the sub rules aren't complicated. They're just little things that within the rules, and that's clearly the right to hit the one that's furthest advanced. So the total outcome then is, for if you use Bagai's system, the 630 positions he deals with, 560. If you use his rules, 568 times you're going to get the right play. 36 times you get what's called a substitution. What he means by substitution is, sometimes a position where there's the right play and then there's another move that's 2 millipoints of not a mistake even, it's just 2 millipoints worse. So he calls that a substitution. So if you use Bagai's rules, 568 times you're going to be perfect. Another 36 times out of the 630, you're not bad. And there's only 26 exceptions that you have to learn. And again, and here's an example of what I mean. We've rolled a 3-1. Our opponent has played a 6-2 out and down. They played 24-18. Rule number 1 for Jeremy Bagai says, hit any blot that's not in your inner board. Well, if you looked on the bottom middle there, black has left a blot on our bar point or 7 point, and we can hit with the wood. We can play 8-7 and hit like that. And again, I'm not going to even worry about the 3 because that's not right. Let's put that back there. The correct move is to play 8-5, make our 5 point. So that's an example of an exception. And again, the exceptions aren't profoundly, unobvious. That's a fairly clear exception to the rule. And there's 26 exceptions that we just have to kind of bear in mind. But if we do that, we're on the course. He said, if you learn the 26 exceptions, for all other 630 replies, you'll either play the best play or a play that's as good as the best play, really. So what I'm going to do is, over the next few weeks, as I said in the previous video, I'm going to start uploading videos from Mitchie's Endgame Technique book as well. But for my own study, I'm going through the 12 Bagai's rules, video by video on each rule, so we can look at the hitting rules. First one is hit any blot that's not in your inner board. So we're going to look at that and look at the sub rules for that, and then we'll move on to playing your naturals as a second video and so on. And I'll just bring in the different commentators as we go, rather than doing here's what Jeremy Bagai says, here's what Machi says, here's what Bill Robertie says, so on. So more videos to follow shortly on this, and I know it's a bit laboured, and I know it's a lot of detail to go 12 videos on just how to play the second role, but God, we could be brilliant. If we can get this right, we're going to be brilliant players.